I'm really excited to be here because staffing is hard for all of us, and we have taken up an approach to solving some of our staffing problems at LindenGrove, but we're now in year 3, so we've had some time to let this approach mature, and we can now share with you some lessons learned and maybe spark some ideas for your own organization. I want to tell you a little about LindenGrove. LindenGrove Communities is located in Waukesha County, and we kind of cover the 4 corners of the county. We have 4 campuses, and 3 out of the 4 campuses have assisted living on them. 1 is only a nursing home, and the other 3 have either a combination of RCAC and CBRF along with the SNF, or just the CBRF and a SNF. So we currently have 253 SNF beds. We used to have 461 SNF beds. We did a huge downsizing over the last couple of years. And we now have more assisted living units than we do SNF beds, but it used to be the other way around. This is kind of the mix of what we have available in our communities. So you can see the different locations. We now do short-term rehab in 3 of our SNFs. We no longer do long-term custodial care in those 3 SNFs. So you can see that very first column, those are small units, and that's a challenge. But we do still have 1 large nursing home, 131 beds, where we offer long-term custodial care. The RCAC units, there's 117, those are in 2 different buildings. We have several CBRF memory care residences. We have opened several new ones in the last couple years. And then we converted one of our assisted living units to a CBRF for advanced assisted living. And some of you might have listened to Suzanne Whitty yesterday when she talked about that program. But this scope of services is where we are placing the staff that I'm going to talk to you about today. So when LindenGrove was looking to solve our staffing crisis, which started back in 2017, we needed to find a solution that would work across multiple campuses and multiple levels of care. So we call this NursingPros, and we talk about it as an internal agency. So what is an internal agency? Well, it's a group of staff that are managed separately from our core regular employed staff, and the purpose of that staff is to float across all of the locations and levels of care so that we have flexibility and we're not burning out our regular core staff. We didn't know how many staff we were going to need to hire when we started on this journey, so we put a stake in the ground, and I'll tell you about what we started with and then where we're at today. So the NursingPros team members, we operate this division like an agency. So we have a director, we have some standard operating procedures, we've got a quality and performance expectation, and the best thing about this for us is these team members are ours. And so when we're filling shifts that were otherwise going to be filled by outside agency, now we've got our own staff, and they're integrated into the milieu and the culture of LindenGrove. We only serve our own locations. We don't take these staff out and contract them to anybody else. So the positions that are included in our NursingPros division are the licensed nursing staff, the CNAs, the resident assistants, the CMAs, and then students. This was a long discussion that we had when we were starting this about what do we do about the students, because they're often not in a place where you could float them to different locations. They obviously newer in their experiences, and they may be best served by having just one primary location. And that is what we ended up doing, was giving them a kind of a primary location instead of floating them. But in this division, these staff, many of them are employed with us because this is their second job or their third job. Like any true agency out there, people are picking up shifts with different employers. Well, these staff are maybe working somewhere else, maybe not even in healthcare, but they're certified nurse aide and they're picking up shifts with us on the weekends or that type of thing. So I'm going to give you some of the verbiage from our planning document. So back in 2018, we did a situation document and came up with our recommendations. And the first thing that was happening is we just had a lot of open shifts. I'm sure many of you can relate to that, but across our many campuses, and at that point in time, we had not downsized our SNFs yet. So we were running a census of about 365 SNF beds, and then we had our assisted living along with it. But we had a lot of open shifts. Our scheduling department, they were working hard. We had schedulers on every campus. They were trying to deploy staff across to different locations, but our staff, the mindset they had was, I'm in the pool at New Berlin, and I'm not going to go work at any other LindenGrove location. I'm just New Berlin's in-house pool, or I'm just McWanago's in-house pool. There was a lot of silos there with the in-house pool. And so deploying people across multiple locations required a lot of policy and procedure redesign, and we really had to look at a lot of the structural things that would support staff who were kind of afraid of going somewhere else. And then the other big thing we did at the same time is we recognized that we really needed to have an online scheduling software. I don't know, how many of you have online scheduling programs? Okay. Yeah, you wouldn't want to live without it, would you? We did not have that. We had notebooks. Schedulers in every campus had their notebook with the calendar in it, and they were handwriting who's coming on what shift and then crossing it off when somebody called in, and it was really kind of a mess. And there was no way to coordinate across locations when you're dealing with paper like that. So we converted to Kronos scheduler, and then that was a big learning curve. But it was really a key to making this whole idea successful. So at the time when we started to plan, just looking at the first 6 months of our fiscal year 2018, we had spent $900,000 on outside agency, just in the first 6 months. And that was way above what we had budgeted for agency. And we were seeing the impact of too many outside team members who, for one reason or another, were not performing the job the way that we needed it. And our own core staff were getting frustrated. Our residents were frustrated. Families were frustrated. We were frustrated as managers and leaders. So here's some things that are part of the job. So if someone is going to work in our Nursing Pros division, they can't be assigned to work at any other skilled facility through an agency. So that's another thing we had to do when we were hiring, was really ask the questions, are you working for any other agency? And the reason for that is the non-compete clauses that were in those 25 or so contracts we had with lots of different agencies. We just didn't want to be caught with a problem. So they had to come to us without having current employment with any other staffing agency. And if they had been recently employed, then we looked at what what the contract and requirements were before we went forward. So we also have where we didn't know for sure we could hire somebody just like all of you. Your census goes up and down, and you may send staff home if it's a low census. At least we used to do that. Now we're just happy if we have a decent census at all. But so we set it up so that if somebody was called in, a Nursing Pros staff was coming in to work and then we had to send them home, we still paid them a couple of hours and paid for their mileage and made sure that we could support them in the fact that they had made a commitment to us. We don't have more than an average of 28 hours a week for these staff because these are non-benefited positions. So in order to kind of keep that as the structure. So we still paid time and a half for holidays. Everybody had to pick up at least one holiday if they were going to join this team. So the foundation to make this work was, getting the Kronos scheduling software together, managing our personnel very closely, collaborating as leaders across multiple campuses and multiple departments, and then putting the operating procedures together. Because the language, that had to take hold was a different vocabulary. It's not in-house pool anymore. This is an in-house pool. This is an agency model operating within our organization to fill gaps where we needed that. And the requirements were different than what our old in-house pool requirements had been. So we really it took a little while for people, for anybody to understand what are we doing and why are we calling it that, and but that's how we went forward, and I think it was the right thing because we were pretty successful. So the requirements for picking up shifts, not too onerous. We said 4 shifts a month. We know that this was their second job or maybe their third job. If they didn't pick up their 4 shifts a month after a 90-day period, if it wasn't averaging that, then they would be dropped. And then student requirements were a little bit different. They did have to be enrolled. We had to have proof of that. And they had to pick up 24 shifts a year. For the most part, we assigned students to one location and didn't float them. But sometimes we had nursing students, and they were CNAs before they were in nursing school, and they were very capable of floating. So we kind of did that on a case-by-case basis. And the educational requirements for the staff that we hired, we have all of our mandatory in-services, and they have to do those. They have to have their licensure maintained and renewed, or their certification. Had to have CPR, and if they were going to work in the CBRFs, had to have the CBRF credentials. So how many people did we onboard in the beginning? So, we kind of started recruiting in a very serious way in May of 2018, and by November we had onboarded 176 people. So getting a lot of people onboarded, assigned out, and managed was a major undertaking. So we looked at the pandemic period and what was happening with our ability to hire people. And it says months 1 through 12 there. Our fiscal year is July to June, so month 1 would have been July. But looking at that 12-month period of our fiscal 2020 and our fiscal 21, you can see that in the earlier years, we hired fewer people. As we went forward, we started having more trouble. So the orange line is our later year, and you can see when it says NursingPros hires 2020 compared to 2021, we are still having some trouble keeping enough positions filled. So here's a way to look at the money part of it. So the fiscal year 18 is the green bars, okay? Now, if you look at that green line, that trend line going up, you can see that from July through June, we got to a point where we were spending almost between $300,000 and $400,000 a month. And then we launched the strategy, and it took a little while for it to start to have an impact. But if you look at the blue bars and that trend line, you can see that, okay, from July to about November, December, we were still spending quite a bit. But you went a little further through that year, and you can start to see how that was decreasing. So then we said, well, okay, what happened during the pandemic? Did this strategy hold water during the pandemic? We've all had more trouble. We've had staff off on quarantine. We've had a multitude of situations that made this, the whole picture difficult. In 2020, when we look at July through December, the orange bars are our nursing pros. This is how many shifts or how many hours were worked by our nursing pros division. You can see it's still a very high number compared to the blue bars, which were how many hours did we have to employ licensed staff. Outside agency staff, primarily licensed people. And then I look at shift pickup. How many shifts is this division picking up? And you can see from just January of this most recent January through July, we've been able to push the shift pickup a little bit higher. Here's another slide on outside agency expense. So in the fiscal year ending June 20, we spent over $750,000 on outside agency, and then the fiscal year ending June 21, it was about half that. Total shifts picked up by this group was about 7,200. In the SNF, it was about 4,500. In the assisted living centers, it was about 2,600. It totaled about 54,000 hours. Pretty big impact. So, to do the math, all we have to do is look at what do we normally pay an agency for a CNA? What's that been? And then what do we pay our own staff through this division for a CNA? And then the delta is the savings. Pretty significant savings. Okay, so some lessons that we learned. First of all, the turnover in this team is quite high. When we looked at our first full fiscal year, it was about 72% turnover. Now, some of that is people just weren't picking up their 4 shifts a month and we had to clear them off the schedule. And then in fiscal 21, it was higher, it was 81%. So there is a constant recruiting, constant, interviewing, constant really fishing for good people who are qualified. That is what we're all experiencing anyway, even with our core regular employees. But you have to be, that's why it's been very good to have a director of this team, because it is so many people. If you think about, right now our team consists of about 115, give or take a few, but then 80% turnover. So, there's this constant revolving door, and having that person not being the DON, not being the scheduler, not being just one HR person, it takes a team to really manage what's going on, and having that director who's well aware of every single person who has applied and what their strengths are and whether they would work in this environment very well or not has made a huge difference. And Bart is the supervisor for that director that we have. And then the internal awareness, we really had, and we still do have to keep a very sustained effort across all of our campuses to talk about this team, what they do, how many shifts they filled, anything that we can put out there to educate our department leaders and our frontline staff that NursingPros team filled, 850 shifts last month, and their shift fills were across all 7 days of the week. And I've already talked about the scheduling software being another one of those key items that made this a successful adventure. So the question is, how did I create the sense of urgency? How did the leadership team get on board? Well, my leadership team was suffering from having the problem of too much expense with outside agency. Too much expense, too much dissatisfaction with our quality of care, too much risk with compliance in the areas we're concerned about. And so their urgency was around, let's solve that problem. And we worked together. We had quite a big planning team working together to implement this. So through the meetings and the working together, everybody kind of bonded around, this is the mission. We just have to, I kept saying, eventually we need to eliminate these outside agency if we can. And I said, I know I'm realistic, there might be some times when we really have to, but we really need to have our own people taking care of our residents. So there wasn't a big issue at the leadership level. There was good buy-in. The board, they love this. They would write a book about this if they could. They really are so pleased that we were able to create such a change in our staffing model. And first of all, I think they were shocked at how much premium agency we were having to buy. And despite our efforts to have good competitive wages and all the good organization, really great facilities, good leadership, we just weren't able to keep the core employee group strong enough, big enough, So they were kind of shocked at oh my gosh, I didn't realize how big that issue really was. And then it didn't take too long, at the end of about the first year after we had started to implement and then mature some of these things, and you could see that expense started to drop quite a bit. They love it. So it just makes sense from every way you look at it: customer service, quality and compliance, financial, and staff satisfaction, having our own staff. It just makes sense.